So many people have said that TikTok is destroying literature, including the classics. But is this true? Or is TikTok having a positive impact on culture by helping millions of people access literary works? But are the types of books promoted on TikTok any good or relevant for our culture? And most importantly, how do users interact with literature in an app known for its brain rot content? I've been reflecting on this because I've been consuming BookTok for a couple of years, and I actually run a BookTok account before I switched to YouTube. As a literature graduate, I posted mainly about classics and literary fiction, and some of my videos got hundreds of thousands of views. I know, not that much for TikTok, but it is still a significant level of engagement. And I had a pretty interesting experience interacting with the audience, but I'll tell you more about that later. To start, we should ask ourselves, why is BookTok so controversial? Communities centered on literature have always existed on the internet. So why is everyone ranting about BookTok? This TikTok community rose in popularity in 2020 during the lockdown. According to an article by Forbes released earlier in 2025, the hashtag BookTok has accumulated over 370 billion views. So the community has grown, and it's not just a bunch of silly videos about books like some people make it out to be. BookTok has significantly influenced the way audiences interact with literature, and it has transformed the publishing industry. But how did this happen? Well, we might begin to answer this question by considering one aspect many articles mention. BookTok thrives on relatability, a quality that might be lacking in traditional reviews and critical analysis. A New York Times article titled "How TikTok Became a Bestseller Machine" argues, the most popular videos don't generally offer information about the book's author, the writing, or even the plot, the way a traditional review does. Instead, readers speak plainly about the emotional journey a book will offer. This influences how the reading experience is perceived. And don't get me wrong, reading is emotional, but on BookTok, people seem to forget that it is an intellectual activity as well. Emotion and intellect are not separate, but when the focus is exclusively on the emotional journey, we might miss some important aspects of the reading experience. When you engage in critical reading, you can still identify with the characters or feel emotionally involved with the story. But you'll also analyze the character construction, the plotline development, the writing style, the use of rhetorical figures, how the book relates to its cultural context, and much more. But do we hear about any of that on BookTok? Some people might jump and say, no, BookTok is ruining reading because it only favors the same 20 books, which are only cliched stories that insult literature. While investigating these concerns, I came across an article titled "TikTok Won't Solve the Reading Crisis," in which the author argues that the drop in reading skills won't be helped by the main type of literature promoted on TikTok. He writes, "Learning to read well, as emphasized by the Swedish literary scholar Maria Nikolajeva," sorry if I mispronounced that, a professor at Cambridge University, is achieved with texts that resist decoding, texts that demand cognitive work, that appeal to the imagination and linguistic ability. Many texts situated at the heart of young people's literary culture in the year 2024 barely fulfill Nikolayeva's condition, if at all. Anna Huang's Twisted Series, Hannah Grace's Icebreaker, these are not texts that resist decoding, so they are not the type to improve reading skills needed to function in the complexity of today's information, or rather disinformation society. While I consider this to be a valid point, I would like to add that I think reading bad literature can be intellectually stimulating if you do it critically. Are the characters superficial stereotypes? Is the plot formulaic and unoriginal? Is the language too prosaic? or the prose too purple. Analyzing the elements that undermine a novel's quality can be an intellectual activity if we are not reading mindlessly. You can enjoy a novel and have the ability to criticize it, and even if the novel is unbearably bad, sometimes it's fun to be a hater. The problem is, if people only read a simple literature, they might never acquire the abilities necessary to criticize it. To worsen this situation, the TikTok algorithm tends to feed you content that is similar to videos you've already watched. So, if you only interact with accounts that promote contemporary romances, you might never come across something different. But does BookTok only recommend contemporary romances and romantasy, or does it offer something different? The Classics and BookTok. Believe it or not, the classics are very popular on TikTok. And I know the term classic in literature is a bit hazy. In the Penn Macmillan article, What Makes a Classic, Harriet Sanders mentions several defining qualities. A classic, she argues, explores universal themes with depth and complexity, allowing it to transcend the era in which it was written. Classics may also be subversive, groundbreaking in form or style, or the most successful exponents of a particular literary movement. What I find really interesting is the way people interact with the classics on TikTok, and I've identified certain popular styles. First of all, there are videos in which you'll just see a phrase that is supposed to describe a stack of books. There's nothing wrong with this. It's just like a list of recommendations based on a particular feeling or aesthetic. But there isn't any critical analysis or even opinions regarding the books. I also found that photo carousels are pretty popular. Here, you'll just see a picture of a book and a brief summary of its argument. Again, nothing wrong with this, but it's just a recommendation. I actually used a new account to browse BookTok so as not to be influenced by my curated algorithm. And I noticed that it is rare to find reviews or critical analysis within the most popular videos. However, if you scroll for long enough, you'll begin to find videos where people actually discuss literature. And these videos are popular. Maybe they don't have 10 million views, but sometimes they are in the hundreds of thousands, and there are many comments adding to the conversation. There are videos that explain the historical and cultural context of a book. Other TikToks analyze the structure of plot lines and the construction of characters. You can find biographies of artists and writers that highlight their impact on culture, and simple recommendations that are not only based on emotional reactions, but on thoughtful reflection. Actually, once I started consuming BookTok content, and I realized it wasn't all smut like some people say, I decided I could contribute to it. Confessions of a BookToker. I used to have a BookTok account. I mean, it's still active. I just don't post anymore since I started my YouTube channel because I don't have time for both. My profile is not huge. I have around 17,000 followers, which I really appreciate, but it's a rather small community compared to the millions of followers some people have. Still, I interacted with a lot of people, and I definitely noticed an immense interest in classic literature and literary fiction. When I had just created my account, I also participated in silly trends. For example, I used an audio to show the first book I was reading in 2025, and actually, I wasn't even enjoying the novel that much. I just thought it was a quick way to generate engagement. I'm not saying this is the reason why everybody posts these types of trends, but I suspect it might be the motivation of many, like it was for me at the beginning. But then I realized I would rather spend more time creating thoughtful reviews than trying fast ways to generate engagement. And actually, for me, that worked out, as I ended up getting many more views than when I followed silly trends. When a community started building around my BookTok account, I noticed how people constantly expressed their desire to read more. Many followers told me that they wanted to create a habit of reading and that they were trying to read more classics and literary fiction. They also asked for tips and for accessible book recommendations. For many people, social media has become one of the primary ways of accessing literature and art. Therefore, it's fundamental that communities like BookTok continue to exist, even if a significant part of them only wants to read fairy smut. Several academic publications, particularly released in the last decade, are evaluating how social media is affecting reading practices. In Social Reading Cultures on BookTube, Bookstagram, and BookTok, Dr. Bronwyn Reddan argues, the most important feature of a bookfluencer's brand is their reputation as a trusted source of book recommendations. They build this trust by sharing their own reading tastes and preferences to define themselves as authentic and relatable book lovers. This is a sentiment I found in many articles. Academics seem to believe that the main values of creators in any book communities are their authenticity and relatability. Of course, I'm not saying this observation is incorrect. However, I think it disregards the fact that many creators are respected for their knowledge and insights. The same article argues, in offering their opinion on the books they have read, booktubers emphasize their identity as readers talking about their personal taste rather than critics or professionals. This is another common misconception. Academics and maybe the general public seem to believe that booktubers and booktalkers are only amateur readers, but there are actually many creators who have an academic background, myself included. However, BookTok and other online reading communities are not only shaped by creators. There are other relevant players in this scenario: publishing and social media. Is BookTok shaping the publishing industry, or is the publishing industry shaping BookTok? Let's think about the first option for a minute. The New York Times article I cited earlier argues, BookTok is not dominated by the usual power players in the book world, such as authors and publishers, but by regular readers, many of them young, who share recommendations and videos of themselves talking about the books they love, sometimes weeping or screaming or tossing a copy across the room. This is accurate, and these common readers have affected the publishing world by creating videos about books with average sales that go viral and end up selling millions. One of the most renowned cases is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, published in 2011 with 20,000 copies printed. The book went viral in 2021 because of a TikTok video, and today it has sold over 2 million copies. But the publishing industry also affects BookTok in many ways. They can conduct marketing campaigns in which creators are paid to promote certain books. They also favor the publication of stories which are similar to the ones already trending on BookTok. And they might try to revive classics by reprinting them in a style that resembles contemporary books. Of course, I am referring to the Puffin controversy that happened earlier this year. Puffin, the youth imprint of Penguin Random House, published a new Jane Austen collection oriented to younger audiences, with flashy covers and interesting forewords. In an article for The Guardian, Sarah Menebis writes, although Austen's stories will remain the same, the covers of these editions feature cartoonish illustrations of the characters and are being marketed as full of meet-cutes, missed connections, and drama. This description makes it sound as if these classic works are akin to the kind of contemporary romance novels that are hugely popular on TikTok with teenagers and young adults. As a response to the backlash received by these new editions, some said that people were trying to gatekeep Jane Austen. I can only speak for myself, but much of the criticism I read came from the same place. I am a literary content creator, and I mainly promote classics and literary fiction, so why would I want to gatekeep an author? The problem with this collection is that the covers set the wrong expectations by associating Austen with contemporary romance authors and overly focusing on the romantic aspect of the books. And you might say, these are romance books. Yes, but they cover so much more. Class, traditions, gender roles, art. For example, Northanger Abbey is a parody of the incredibly popular Gothic novels. It questions the cultural status of novels which were regarded in the best way, and it also analyzes literary genres associated with men and women, and their reputation as more or less intellectual. I have an edition that has a pretty simple and modern cover, but it is representative of the content of the book. You can see the protagonist, Catherine Morland, reading because that is her favorite activity. And that is how the discussion of literature is introduced in the story. And you can also see the crows, which symbolize the Gothic aesthetic. Compare this to the puffin cover. There's nothing indicative of the content of Northanger Abbey. This is actually one of the least romantic Austen novels, so to show the protagonists in a tender embrace doesn't make much sense. This felt more like a marketing strategy designed to increase sales by creating a collection that people would buy based on its aesthetics, rather than a true strategy to stimulate younger audiences to read the classics. So sometimes the influence of BookTok on the publishing industry might not lead to the best results. However, there's always been questionable sales strategies. It's not like they were created after TikTok was invented. I just found it interesting to analyze how this app impacts the publishing industry, in particular when trying to maintain the sales of classics. Conclusion. Is it valid to say that TikTok might have a simultaneous positive and negative influence on literature? Because I think that might be the most accurate conclusion. It is undeniable that the most popular videos don't have any thoughtful insights, but there are brilliant creators who post interesting reviews and analysis, and thanks to them, I found some of my favorite new books, and I have an ever-growing reading list. Most importantly, many people might have their first enjoyable encounter with literature because of a TikTok video. And BookTok might be having a weird effect on publishing, but that is a business, and they will always be looking for new ways to increase their revenue. At least in an app that can have you scrolling for 12 hours straight, there is a community that will encourage you to leave your phone and open a book. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. I wanted to thank you for the incredible response to my last video, and I hope to see you soon.